Honestly, I can't believe I'm making this video. I am genuinely stunned. Have you ever heard of Interpol? Do you know what it is? Probably like me, you recognize it maybe from spy movies. They're the international police force, which is supposed to focus on things like counterterrorism and organized crime such as human sex and slave trafficking and serious international cybercrime. I think it's fair to say they suck at most of that. But now I think I know why. Because they're too busy banning conservative journalists from traveling internationally to cover public interest events at the request of authoritarian governments. Sounds like a conspiracy, doesn't it? Well, it is. But it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy fact, and we have the receipts to prove it. Unlucky for the lying New Zealand immigration and their lackeys in the mainstream media, we've got leaked internal Interpol memo proving precisely that. So watch this shocking report from beginning to end. The evidence, it speaks for itself, so you don't have to trust me. Then share the heck out of it to help us hold everyone involved accountable. And finally, please head over to saveaviyemini.com, sign my petition, and donate what you can to help me fight back. Let me start at the beginning for those of you that are just joining us now. After almost 2 years of closed New Zealand borders, where it's been near impossible for international media to cover what's truly happening on the ground there, most news outlets simply relied solely on republishing local media stories, which have throughout this entire time demonized the growing Kiwi rebellion. Important relevant fun fact, I reckon, is Jacinda Ardern's government is currently handing out $55 million to New Zealand news corporations that the media minister deems worthy, which is a lot of money for such a tiny country, making the relationship between the state and the press a little incestuous, to say the least. As soon as the borders did open, Rebel News asked me to head there to tell the other side of the story, so another independent Australian journalist, Rukshan Fernandez, the real Rukshan, and I plan to head there to cover a mass protest this week and spend some time covering other stories from across the country. In fact, we were even discussing potential interviews with the Ministry of Social Development, although they did bizarrely request our list of questions first. Again, the New Zealand government doesn't understand the concept of free press holding them accountable. And in a minute, you'll see how anti-democratic their relationship really is. 2 days before we were scheduled to leave, without a byline, the New Zealand Herald published an article ironically titled Australian Conspiracy Commentators to Attend Event. Ironically, because it turns out they were conspiring with police to smear both myself and Rukshan in a joint effort to have us banned. We laughed it off until I arrived at Melbourne Airport, only to be banned from boarding my flight because, as I was told on the phone by the New Zealand immigration agent Sarah, she had read an article online and is exercising her power to refuse me entry on character grounds. What else could I do? I walked outside to the front of the airport and let my viewers know what had happened. Just about to board a flight, but as I went to check in, my passport was flagged. So as I left the airport, I instantly instructed our legal team, both here and in New Zealand, to begin the process of appealing the unlawful decision. But we were struggling to get the New Zealand immigration to put their reasons in writing, which is essentially what you need to file any sort of judicial review. And to make matters worse, immigration was making false statements through the mainstream media, which they lapped up. Every single headline claimed that I was refused entry for a conviction that, according to the New Zealand Immigration Act itself, didn't reach the threshold. In short, they can only ban an Aussie from New Zealand if they are convicted of a crime and jailed for at least 12 months in the last 10 years. But I've never spent a day in jail. Yet not one New Zealand-based journalist bothered to ask that obvious question. They all celebrated the outcome. The only news person who called it out immediately was Andrew Bolt from Sky News Australia.
What they're getting you for is that, and this is not pleasant, it's embarrassing for you, and a lot of people think worse of you. You had an argument with your then wife, you threw something, a cutting board, and it hit her on the head, and you got fined, I think, $3,500. You were not jailed. So on that grounds, people may not like you, but you did not breach New Zealand's regulations for coming in. And I think here's the issue. Whether people like you or not, whether they like your politics or not, it's about free speech. And what it seems to me is that they've picked on this as an excuse to deny a journalist they don't like, cheered on by the media of all things, to stop you covering a protest they don't want to occur.
In response to that honest piece of journalism, the usual suspects condemned Bolt for minimising domestic violence and peddling the bizarre myth and conspiracy theory of cancel culture. Well, guess what? It turns out that Andrew Bolt was right on the money, and we now have the evidence to prove it. Less than 24 hours after the New Zealand Herald launched their campaign to have us banned, Interpol New Zealand sent an internal email on their private server to their Aussie colleagues that has since been leaked to New Zealand's largest and most popular conservative news and commentary website. The email, titled Avi Yemini and Rukshan Fernandez, Information Sought, Criminal History, reads, Wellington has received information that the two above named are believed to be Australian nationals intending to travel to New Zealand to join protest activity at Parliament scheduled on 23 August 2022. New Zealand police would like to stop the two from entering New Zealand and urgently seek any information regarding criminal convictions or any information tending to show they are individuals of bad character associated to criminal groups and individuals or far right. NZ police do not hold any information on the two subjects. Both subjects are associated to NZ social media commentator Chantel Baker and are expected to join her at the protest in Parliament, posing as reporters. Avi Yemini is noted by commentators as a far-right extremist commentator. Avi Yemini has proudly called himself at a London protest in 2018 the world's proudest Jewish Nazi. Fernandez is noted as a misinformation super spreader. Rukshan has been labelled as a hero of the anti-mandate, anti-vax, anti-government movement. So remember, that's within 24 hours of the New Zealand Herald article being published. Almost word for word, every single allegation taken from that article as an excuse to have us banned. I reckon we can agree this internal request vindicates me and exposes the media for regurgitating the blatant New Zealand immigration lies. I wasn't banned for my conviction or wrongly filled paperwork. They just didn't want me reporting from the protest. In fact, even if I was going as a protester, it goes against everything Jacinda Ardern said in her response to my banning.
There's also been a YouTuber from Australia that says that they've been denied entry into New Zealand. Have you been briefed on the situation?
I've only what I have seen in the public domain, and just to be absolutely clear, this is not something that, as I understand, would come to up to a ministerial level decision. I understand that it is solely for immigration, and it's not something I had any awareness of until I saw some commentary online.
Prime Minister, how concerned is the government at the potential for people coming from overseas to be part of these protests?
How what, sorry?
How concerned is the government that people might come from overseas to join these protests?
Again, for us, it's not about where people have come from. It's simply whether they're willing to engage in peaceful and lawful protest.
They even banned journalists, but I'm sure you and your communist regime had nothing to do with it. After authenticating the leaked email, I sent a request for comment to Canberra Interpol, who, between them and the AFP, frantically opened the email a whopping 150 times, but are yet to answer the two basic questions I had. Is it standard procedure for Interpol in other countries to fish for information they can use to stop Australian citizens from crossing their border? And two, did they indeed provide Interpol Wellington with any information regarding their requests? Minutes later, I sent 9 questions to Interpol Wellington, which They opened it 32 times before sending me this reply. Dear Mr. Yemini, I'm surprised it didn't say Dear Poser, your inquiry has been directed to the New Zealand Police Media Team. Best regards, Interpol, Wellington. Well, surprise, surprise, it's been 4 days and still no answer. By the way, just in case you're wondering, these were the questions which I'd say all media should have been asking that I sent through to them. Is it standard procedure for Interpol in New Zealand to fish for information they can use to stop Australian citizens from crossing their border? Why did New Zealand police want to stop Australian nationals from attending the protest? Who at New Zealand police made the request? What did they mean, Australians posing as reporters? New Zealand immigration has made comments to the media that the onus is on the traveller to prove their conviction doesn't meet the 12-month jail threshold, banning entry to New Zealand. In light of this internal request, didn't they already have the proof? Did they know that I was Jewish? Have they seen the source of that so-called Nazi claim, including the complete sarcastic context? On what basis did they conclude that both or either Australian national is associated to New Zealand social media commentator Chantel Baker? And finally, was the New Zealand Herald article the only source of information Interpol New Zealand had in trying to stop Australian nationals from gaining entry? Go on, media. I'm allegedly just posing. You do the real deal. You do your job. Those are the real questions. You can borrow them. Just print the full answers. Guys, I think one thing's clear from this entire story. We can't trust the mainstream media to get the truth out here. It's up to you to share the heck out of it. It's an international scandal. If it can happen to me, you don't have to like me, but if it can happen to me today, it can happen to you tomorrow or someone you like tomorrow. Let's hold the New Zealand government accountable and make sure to tag every news outlet, every activist, and every public figure who ran the original fake news because they hate me. Embarrass the heck out of them. And then head over to saveaviyemini.com, add your name to my petition, and if you have the means to, please donate what you can to my legal fund, which now the prospects of success are looking a million times better. Saveaviyemini.com. I can't do any of this without your help.